So, welcome to the Bearfoot Miniatures rundown of the House of Blades, or House Escher. I'm going to do this because I've been looking into the Escher more, as I want to do a campaign playing from the as a House Escher gang. And that's just caused me to go through the book again, look more in depth at the Escher than I have when I've been playing skirmish scenarios or just to have an overall viewpoint when I've played against them. So I think House Escher is not a beginner gang. I term a beginner gang something that has a very clear play style, like Van Saar going for shooting, or Goliath being very combat focused. And I don't think a beginner gang has much to do with the actual power level of the gang. It's just that with that very clear strategy of how you are going to play it, it's easy to start working through the game mechanics and how they are going to start punishing their opponents as you go through your campaign or skirmish. So why I say they're not a beginner gang is that they can be tooled for both shooting or combat. And I think the ways that you do those aren't through direct means, such as shooting skills to make a shooty Escher gang, or through just having the toughest, strongest people around in terms of a combat gang. But I think you need to outmaneuver your opponent a bit more. I think you need to envelop them, basically, rather than dominating space like you might do with a Van Saar or Goliath gang. And it's not that I think those gangs are super easy, it's just that there's less of a set strategy when you approach a game. So what do Escher have going for them? Well, I think that they've all got high initiative, or I don't think that's a fact. They've all got high initiative. The champions and leader being like 2+ initiative. And that ties quite well into their agility skill set, which I think is a really good skill set. Mainly because it includes one of the best skills in the game, I would say, which is Spring Up, which if you get hit by a shot, you get pinned, and then you roll an initiative check when you next activate to just stand up without costing you an action. Now, I think that's better than Nerves of Steel because it actually mitigates any second shots against your champion or whichever gang has got the skill. So it means that you can't be targeted as easily after that first time, especially combined with your high initiative. That means if your leader with Spring Up gets shot, any gangers, if your opponent has activated in the wrong order, that might actually, and I've done this before, that might cause them to not be able to fire with a better weapon. If they fire with a lasgun, you just take the lasgun shot, fall down, and then you might be behind cover in which they can't target you, or because you pinned at long range, they get a -1 to target you, which makes them a lot harder to hit. Now, so I think that's quite a strong skill set, especially with some other skills that they've got in there. Catfall is quite good if you've got a 3D playing field. You've got Clamber, which is situationally good because climbing I never find such of a problem. Dodge is obviously helps you mitigate hits, but I don't find the 6 reliable enough. Mighty Leap is very good if you're playing on 3D terrain with gaps. Spring Up is excellent. Sprint is really good. It's not the first skill I'd ever choose, but is a really, really good skill to make you much more mobile, especially when you've got that movement 5. You're moving 15 inches a turn rather than 12, so the difference is actually nearly a full fighter's movement if you start sprinting. Now, they also have wide access to combat skills. The highlight of combat skill tree is the step aside skill, and that meshes really well with your good initiative because it allows you to ignore a hit that might otherwise take you out if you pass an initiative check. So especially against gangers with 1 attack, they're pretty much never hurting your champions and leader if they've got the step aside skill. So I think that's a really good point in the Escher's favour. As well as that, their access to chems and toxin is good. They get them, I believe, slightly cheaper than other gangs, but they also get the chem synth to allow them to really boost up the effect of that toxin by making it easier to wound with it. And that helps you take out multi-wound champions, leaders, brutes, things like that other gangs might struggle with because they have to go through all of the wounds before doing serious injuries. Finally, they have access to what end up as one of the cheapest gangers in the game, which is the lasgun Escher ganger. And that's not because of the initial cost of the ganger, but because of the 5 cred cost of lasguns throughout the entire gang. In fact, it's a positive for everyone, because if you've ever got 5 creds left over, which is quite often, you put a lasgun on someone that's not got a ranged weapon, and it just adds to your versatility. It's a really reliable weapon with a good short range to get that +1 bonus. It's 18 inches for the lasgun and +1 to hit. So it just allows you to outpin your opponent and really capitalise on your, what I said before, your movement that needs to envelop your opponent. So it helps pin them out of the game, essentially. So what are the negatives? Now, it used to be that you had terrible cool as an Escher, but that's actually been removed in the House of Blades, or at least mitigated a lot by boosting all of their cools. You've not got the high strength or toughness that a lot of other gangs have. So you're on the squishier side of all the gangs, but the high strength is mitigated by your access to toxin and gas weapons. Because toxin, well, you're just going off your toxin rather than your weapon, or rather than your own strength. Toughness is sort of a hard one to mitigate, but you're mitigating that with your step aside in combat, and also just capitalising on cover with spring up. So I think that they're actually in a really good place as a gang. Now, with that, we'll get into the actual profiles of all the gangers and how I would take them. Then we'll do, obviously, the hangers on, as I always seem to do. And finally, 2 example lists, of which I'm going to give you my list that I'm currently working on for the next campaign, as well as a list that I would just recommend as a bit of a fun list, or even just like a mutable list that you could use in any situation. So the Escher Gang Queen, she's 125 credits, movement 5, weapon skill 3, ballistic skill 3, so quite all round as a leader. It's not amazingly good hitting on a 2+ with anything. Having 3s on both just adds to the versatility that as an Escher gang you want to be taking. It's like how people say Orlocks can adapt to anything. I believe Escher can adapt to anything as well. And that doesn't mean that I think they'll be the best at everything. Like, you'll be worse than a Goliath in combat, but slightly better at shooting maybe. And you're going to be worse than a Vansar at shooting, but you'll be slightly better in combat. So I think that's where the non-beginnerness comes in, because you don't have that clear, I'm better than you at this. So yeah, strength 3, toughness 3, 2 wounds, initiative 2+. And that is really, really good. Attacks 3, so you've got 1 more than most leaders. Leadership and cool, 5+, so really good. Will, intelligence, 6 and 7. You've got all the standard gang leader, gang hierarchy, tools of the trade activation. And I think that's a really good profile to start with. As I said, it's not got the 2+, but it's very solid for kitting out in multiple ways and having a versatile gang. So skills, you've got agility, combat, which we've just been through as your primary, and leadership primary. Your finesse is secondary, so we'll leave that to when we get to where it's primary. How would I skill out your leader? Iron Will is really good as standard. I've just started playing a campaign with Mentor. I've always skipped it before, but I sort of like how that's forcing me to play with the Orlocks. So I'd recommend that as well. People online don't seem to like it, but I quite like it as a leader skill. They all pale next to Step Aside, and even that pales next to Spring Up. And you'll always want to take Spring Up if you don't mind spamming skills, because it's so useful. And it lends itself to every situation. If you want to get into combat, well, you spring up and charge. If you want to shoot, you let yourself be pinned, spring up, aim and shoot. Or aim, spring up, move and shoot. It's just always good, especially with that initiative 2. What would I equip them with? Autogun, never. You never want an autogun in this list, because lasguns are 5 credits. I wouldn't actually put any basic weapons on my leader. I'd go for combat here, or I like to go combat with a pistol. I like the needle pistol for 25 credits. It's not nearly as expensive as a plasma. It really lends itself to when you're sneak attacking someone because it's silent. It helps you take out those multi-wound models. And when you put a chem synth, which I would recommend to anything with a toxin weapon in this list, it becomes much more scary, because you're wounding Goliaths on 3s then. You're wounding every other ganger on a 2. So I definitely recommend the needle pistol, because it's 40 credits with the chem synth compared to 50 on the plasma. And plasmas are always really good, but it's just with that access to something that isn't a plasma somewhere, because they're a bit spammy, I'd go for the needle, because it lends itself to the sneak attacks. Combi bolt pistol needle for 60. For that, I don't think it's worth it. You could almost have a needle and a plasma for 15 more credits. It's just not worth it, I don't think. On to special weapons. I quite like the Bolter Needler just because it's their special thing, right? You don't get to use that needler in combat like you would the needle pistol, but for 80 credits, I think it's a really good option. Bolter Flamer is, I think, trash. Bolter Melter Gun, I love Bolter Melter Guns. If you have the credits, I would put Bolter Melter Gun on a champion or leader. I just really like frying someone, having the option to just instantly take someone out with that melter. It's really scary, forces your opponent to adapt. So I really recommend that. Needle Rifle. So if I was going a ranged leader that wanted to go mid-ranged, I'd go Needle Rifle. But having the Needle Pistol to get the shot in combat, I think is much better when you are on a combat champion or leader. Chem Thrower, I don't think is actually great until you start adding loads more credits. So I'd save that to later in the game, because you want your chems to apply to it. As it stands, for something, it doesn't pin. I do think it's a good weapon in this list with a chem synth and other things to apply to it. Melter Gun, recommend taking the combi melter over just a standard melter gun. If it goes out of ammo, you just immediately fire the other side of the combi. And even though they might go out of ammo more often, I find the ability to just immediately fire another scary weapon is really, really useful. Plasma guns, plasmas are always good. I'm going to keep saying that through the champion and then just stop, but anytime you want to spam a list, plasmas are in the game. Heavy weapons, I would not go heavy weapons with this champion or with this leader. So then on to combat weapons, which ones would I take? So Chain Axe, really good. Why does it have all the skills or the special rules that it comes stock with? I don't know, but the fact that it does means it's really, really good. Chainsword, only 5 credits less. I'd recommend the Chain Axe over the Chainsword if you can take it, and you can. What I would recommend is a Shock Whip because it's versatile. And the Master Crafted, if you can just pip it on there, if you can afford it, really good. What I would also recommend is the Stiletto Sword, and you can Master Craft it. And that's because, although you roll in randomly to its secondary, Finesse, I believe, is a really good table. And rolling randomly on Finesse isn't too bad. And if you get Combat Virtuoso, gaining the versatile trait on a Stiletto Sword, and I know you can gain it on a Chain Sword as well, but on a Stiletto Sword is just really, really good. Grenades, I would actually recommend some grenades to start with across the gang, and it doesn't really matter where you put them. Photon Flash Grenades are really good in the Escher Gang because of that high initiative for yourself. Would I recommend putting it on the leader? Yes, they're good anywhere. If you have got the Juves, it starts there because it mitigates their low BS. So potentially skip it, but get some in there. Personal equipment and armor. I don't like armor to start with. I think it's a bit too expensive. I like it on, say, like my Arms Master in my Orlocks has it because he's staying stood up with his Nerves of Steel, so he can't just hide and mitigate a lot of damage. But with the Spring Up skill, you can mitigate that damage. I don't think you need to start with it. I think you definitely need Chem Synth if you've got a needle weapon or a toxin weapon. It just multiplies the actual usability of that toxin weapon by far. It makes them into a top tier weapon rather than just like middle. With that, I'll go over the Phyrr Cat later. That is my thoughts on an initial loadout. Like las projectors, I never go over the weapon accessories or things like that because I think they're so dependent on credits. You never want to start with them. I just don't think they're worth it at all. To start with, that is. When you get later into a campaign, you want to be considering these things yourselves rather than going off what I say. A Suspenser is obviously always good on a heavy weapon. I wouldn't even take a heavy weapon unless I've got Spring Up. Do you know what? I wouldn't even take them without a Suspenser because it's just the ability to aim and shoot or move and shoot with a heavy weapon is just such a force multiplier. So onto the Gang Matriarch, similar to the Gang Queen. So it's 100 credits, movement 5, weapon skill, ballistic skill 3, 2 wounds, initiative 2, 2 attacks, and then 6s for all of the mental skills. Standard special rules, skills, everything like that. And then onto the skill access. Now you have combat and agility again. And again, Spring Up is good on a shooting champion. And I'm going to recommend you make the Matriach a shooting champion. Combat I like, but when we get to the other champion, which is the Death Maiden, you'll see why I think you should spec this one as shooting. So this is your access to shooting. And basic weapons, I'd sort of skip over except for the acid ammo shotgun. Now acid ammo is 16-inch range and it has the blaze trait. So I actually really like that as a weapon for a long range, essentially inferno ammo that everyone else gets, but you get these base. I like that. It's not specifically what I would put on your Matriach, but I do think it's a good inclusion if you're playing a campaign with multiple Matriarchs. Bolters are also good. This champion is where I would put your Combi Melter, Combi Plasma. Combi Melter because you can take more risks with a champion than a leader. So you can move into the open if an opportunity presents itself and needs to happen and just melter someone, whereas your leader you might have to think more about not moving into the open to get that shot. Chem Thrower, I wouldn't put it here. You've got a good BS, you don't need it. I like the needle rifle on this slot because it's really using your better BS to its full effect. So yeah, it's Combi Plasma, Combi Melter, Needle Rifle. You might notice that I don't recommend grenade launchers a lot. I like them, they can get a bit spammy. I've used them a lot. I think they're really useful with smoke grenades, so I'd recommend a grenade launcher smoke grenades. But just because everyone seems to use them, I don't tend to recommend them so that you, after watching this, can be doing something different to what lots of people recommend online. If you wanted to be recommended a grenade launcher list, take grenade launchers on everyone. They're really good. And you can probably go and troll Reddit for the best list with grenade launchers for Escher. Now, heavy weapons, heavy stubber and plasma cannon. So the heavy stubber, we all know what it does. As I've said, you need to put a suspensor on both of these. Now the plasma cannon, you get 18 inch short, 36 long, plus 1 inch short. So the lowest strength 6, AP -1, 2 damage, ammo 5+, and rapid fire 1. So you're not getting the blast here. But I do think it's quite good. Wounding on 2s against toughness 3 opponents, which is pretty much everyone in the base game. It is scarce, but we all know plasma is scarce. I quite like that mode. We'll get to the creds later. Maximal fire isn't rapid fire. Strength 8, so you're wounding Goliaths on 2s now at -2 AP and 3 damage. Blast 3 inch, so it's good versatility on crowd control here. Unstable though, as we know maximal fire on plasmas are, and unwieldy. So 130 credits, it actually makes it, well, it's comparable to the heavy stubber. It's got 1 less ammo dice, but instead of wounding on 3s against a toughness 3, you're wounding on 2s against a toughness 3. And you're wounding on 3s against a Goliath at toughness 4. I actually think it's worthwhile taking a plasma cannon. Do I like it more than a special weapon? No, because at least at the start, because I like to start without having to buy the suspensor. Do I think you can get away without the suspensor here? Yes, with Spring Up, because I don't believe a heavy weapon is usable really without something to keep you stood up or the ability to stand up and fire. Would I recommend it in general? Yes. Can you start with it? Yes. Do I like starting with it? No, I like starting with that special, as I said. Combat weapons, the same as the leader, the Mastercrafted Shockwhip for versatile. You don't have the Chain Axe, so I'm not recommending that. Or Stiletto Sword with Mastercrafted. And obviously your Finesse is secondary. As I've said, I like rolling on it because it's got a number of really good skills. Would I take it on this champion? No. I would take a standard loadout, I think, here, because maybe I should do that as we go along that I've not done before, would be Bolter Plasma and Smoke Grenades. Or Bolter Needler Chemsynth Smoke Grenades. So they're getting up there in credits, but it's where you capitalise on your good BS. So the next champion is the Death Maiden. And finally some access to the Finesse Skills tree to start, because it's primary. So 115 credits, you get movement 6, so 1 better than the rest of your champions and leader. Weapon skill 2+, so very clearly a combat character. Ballistic skill 3, so she's just as good at shooting as anyone else. It's just the access that means it's not definitely a shooting character. Strength 3, toughness 4, very good, especially in this gang, because you get all the benefits of your like ability to mitigate damage, but you also get that high toughness that's very rare, or not very rare, but it's only on 1 or 2 gangs. 2 wounds, initiative 2, excellent again. 3 attacks, so your same attacks as your leader, and it really lends itself to that combat again. Cool 4+ because she's already dead, so she doesn't care. Now you get gang hierarchy, tools of the trade, poison blood, and just skills. Now, Poison Blood is if you've got Toxin trait, you reroll a natural 1 on the d6 when rolling against target's toughness. That's very good, so it will inform your weapon choice. You don't have the ability to group activate, so you do need those other champions to get the alpha strike on people. You get Agility and Finesse as primaries, Ferocity secondary, which is an excellent skill tree to roll on, Combat as secondary. There are a lot of skills that are decent in there, that are maybe even good in there. You have such good skill access for primary and ferocity that I'd roll secondary on ferocity rather than combat. You might get that step aside from combat if you roll randomly, but it's 1 out of 6. You can also get, I'll actually just go over the table since I'm mentioning it. Combat Master is good. You never suffer penalties on rolls to hit, regardless of how many fighters. It's good, but it's not something that you want initially. It's like a 4th, 5th skill choice. Counter attack, when you make reaction attacks, roll 1 extra dice for each attacker's dice that fail to hit. Now this relies on your opponent not taking you out after they've charged you. So anyone that is charging you or attacking you with something is, like, I would say, likely to take you out. No one's charging you with a ganger and expecting them to fail. Disarm is good. Parry is good. Rain of Blows. Now, I would think you want to be charging and taking someone out, because I tend to think their reaction attacks take you back out if you don't take them out. So I'm not the biggest fan. Step Aside, excellent. So I suppose there are 4 skills in this tree that you could potentially get use from, but I'd say really there's only 2 that are worth that roll. So it's not as good as Ferocity, which gets like 4 skills on there for the random roll. So what do you get in the equipment list? Throwing knives. Cool, it's 5 credits. Pistols, and this is a combat fighter, so I'd go pistol just because you get that second attack. It gives you versatility when you're not in combat. And I'd go needle pistol because you get the poison blood for rerolling the 1. You get access to a chem synth. Needle pistol is very good. You could even go dual needle pistol and needle pistol people in combat with you too. That's actually a picture on the page that is very cool. I think I'd even like to do that, but it's hard to recommend. So the Venom Claw, engage range, -2 AP, entangle and toxin. So it's a really good option. You also get access to the Stiletto Sword, which is -1 AP, parry, toxin. Now, where would I go with this? And it actually comes down to the Finesse skill tree. So I'll go over that now and return back to death. So the Finesse skill tree, I would say, that I think is worth rolling on. And that's because you have acrobatic. So you ignore enemy fighters when making a move or charge action. In addition, it allows you to move over the fighters. Note that it must still be outside of 1 inches when the move is complete. You may also cross any barricade or linear terrain feature up to 2 inches high without reduction. Really good for getting about. Would I choose it to start? No. Again, everyone gets access to agility, especially in your combat characters. You need that spring up, because otherwise you can get pinned out of charging. Combat focus. Every enemy fighter taken out of action, you get +1 to will and cool checks for each token on this fighter's card. The result of a 2 of willpower or cool fails. Now, I do actually think that's really good. When you start getting whittled down in numbers, it means your Death Maiden can stay in the game because she doesn't care and just keep killing people until the odds go in your favour. It's not as good as Spring Up, but it's on your primary skill tree, so you can choose it when it becomes appropriate. Combat Virtuoso. Now, this is really good. Gaining versatile on chainsword, fighting knives, power swords, stiletto knives, stiletto swords, with a long range equal to your strength. This is excellent. It effectively extends your charge range immediately by 3. And if you put points into strength, it can go 4, even higher if you can really be asked. So I think it's really good because it's that immediate extension to your charge range. And it also means you can stand up and fight. I suppose even twice with Rain of Blows, though I'm not the biggest fan. You can even stand up and fight from that 3 inches away. So really, really good. Hit and run, after making a charge double action before the reaction attacks, you can make a retreat basic action. And you've got an initiative of 2+, so it's likely to come off. And that retreat, even if it's unsuccessful, they may only make reaction attacks once. So if you fail your retreat action, they don't get to reaction attack both your retreat and your combat. I think it's really good. It's not an initial skill to take, but it is really, really good for mitigating that damage. It basically turns on its head what I say about you need to take stuff out in the first go. This skill means that you might not have to, especially when combined with lightning reflexes. When engaged by an enemy fighter, you may attempt to make a retreat basic action for free before the enemy fighter makes attacks or additional attacks. Now this is excellent, especially on a shooting character, but it's also good on your combat characters that you don't want getting hit. It means that unless your opponent has a versatile weapon, they definitely can't hurt you because you have that initiative 2, so it's pretty much like it's a near sure thing to come off. And you can only use it once, but just don't put yourself in a position you can be charged multiple times. Pick the direction of retreat so that you're not getting hit multiple times by a charge. Somersault, as a basic action, move to anywhere within 6 of your current position. It doesn't count as moving for purposes of what's triggered. So basically you somersault into the air and land wherever you want. And it's just, you can move over gaps, you can move anywhere because it's just placed within 6. During the activation of which you are making, that fighter may make a shoot basic action with a weapon that has unwieldy. If they do so, apply a -1 modifier to hit rolls. If you want to make a shot with an unwieldy weapon, you can make that shot after you've done a somersault with a -1 to hit. Even if it has unwieldy, you can make a shoot basic action. So effectively, it's not taking up that, you can still move and shoot with that action. So if you have the spring up skill and no suspensor, I suppose, you can spring up, and yes, you'll have had to roll randomly for this because your Death Maiden isn't getting a heavy weapon. You can spring up, do a somersault, and then make a shoot action at -1 without having a suspensor, even though you've moved essentially. Back to the Death Maiden, what would I take as combat weapons? Now, I actually really like the stiletto sword option here. Chainsword doesn't capitalize on your poison blood or your access to a chem synth. Really, you want, so that puts it shock whips for the versatile stiletto sword venom claw, because stiletto knife is a bit of a budget option. I take it really if you want a budget option, but I'm focusing on what's best here. And that is, I believe, the stiletto sword actually. I know it lacks an AP, but as soon as you get combat virtuoso, it's versatile 3. And I think that is one of the best combinations for these Death Maidens, is spring up, combat virtuoso, stiletto sword, chem synth, and flavor with pistols as you like. Because you're then doing your toxin at +1, you re-roll in the 1s, which is really, it's a really good combination, cuts down on the fails so much. And that versatile, which the Venom Claw doesn't have access to when you get that skill, I would definitely take as a massive thing because versatile is just so good. Would I take smoke grenades here? Yes, when I get some credits. I think you need smoke grenades somewhere in this gang just to manipulate your opponent. Would I take photon flash here? Potentially, but I think there's better places for photon flash. So that is what I think about the Death Maiden, really. I think the stiletto sword with that combat virtuoso is better. It's just that you're going to be spoilt for choice on the finesse tree. It's just such a good thing that you can roll randomly on it, I think, and pretty much every single one is useful. Even the weaker one removed, it means it's a 5 out of 6 chance to get a really good one. So on to Wyld Runners. These are 45 credits, movement 6. Weapon skill, ballistic skill 4, strength 2, which is really disappointing. Toughness 3, 1 wound, initiative 3, 1 attack, leadership 9, cool 7, will 9, intelligence 9. So for the future leaders of the gang, these are fairly weak mental skills. But they are gang fighter prospect, so they count towards against your champions. Hot-headed, fast learner, tools of the trade. They've got agility primary, so can get that really important spring up without having to roll randomly. Sadly, they don't have finesse as secondary. They've got cunning secondary and combat secondary. Now, I think you use the primary to select the skills that you want from agility, and then you start rolling randomly on combat or cunning. Though I would probably, after spring up, which I would take straight away, start putting points into your stats with these rather than into more skills until they get promoted. On the weapons, you've got throwing knives, which are really cool, but Wyld Bow, 10 credits, which can take poison arrows, explosive arrows, and acid arrows. Now, Wyld Bows are a real disappointment. It's only 10 credits, so it keeps your fighter at 55 creds. But that's the same as a Lasgun Ganger. To upgrade it with poison arrows, I think the Toxin is really good here. It's the best option, I think. Especially because you've got access to a Chemist. The only problem is at long range, which is over 9 inches, you're hitting on a 5 before cover even. And it sort of kills Wyld Runners. Explosive arrows, I like strength 2 frag grenades, but that strength through sort of kills Wyld Runners. Acid arrows, now I believe you get blaze on these. I sort of looked at them and dismissed them because I don't believe it's the best option. Yeah, Wyld Bow, blaze at strength 3. Now, it's quite good, blaze. Blaze is obviously really good, but I don't think it's as good as Toxin, especially when you've got access to a Chemsynth. So I'm going to be recommending putting poison arrows on these. And I don't actually think they're the greatest fighters or even things to have in the list. I just think they're really cool. So pistols, Lasgun, Stub Gun with Dum Dum. Stub Gun with Dum Dum is the same price as a Las pistol, so I'd use that over a Las pistol. Combat weapons, chainsword, fighting knife, power knife, stiletto knife, and a whip. Now, not a shock whip. Although it has versatile, I'd actually most recommend putting a stiletto knife here when you get the credits. I'd recommend starting with just the poison arrows and a Chemsynth, and then adding a stiletto knife and a stub gun. Why would I do that? Well, the draw of these is the bow. I don't think it's a great weapon, but they look cool. But the whip is rubbish. Chainsword is very good, it's just a bit expensive. Stiletto knife, it mitigates your strength 2, which is key. And also why you're taking these is the Phalanx. The Phalanx is a 50 credits, movement 6, weapon skill 4, strength toughness 3, 1 wound, initiative 3, 2 attacks, cool 7. It has a venomous bite, so on a 6 to hit, it gains Toxin. So on a charge, your Phalanx is getting 3 attacks. Fairly good chance of getting Toxin. But untamed, all of its attacks have the Reckless trait. So that means if you're facing towards another Phalanx or your own fighter, you've got a chance of hitting your own fighter with that. Are they the greatest things ever? No. Are they cool? Yes. I will be taking some and recommending one in one of the lists just because of the theme and look. Oh, not theme, but like the looks of it, and it's their special thing. I think you can get by with having some bad things in the gang, in any gang. So I do believe you can take them, I just don't believe it's optimal. There's recommendations to use them as like blocking models. Do I think a 45 credit Wyld Runner with a Wyld Bow to make it 55, at cheapest 55 plus a Phalanx for 50? Do I think that is a good blocking thing? No, because now Wasteland Beastmasters exist. Or even Juves exist, if you're really going to go that route. But with the Wasteland Beastmaster, if you want some blocking models, you take the Beastmaster with rats, and they just come back automatically if they die, or if you choose to get rid of them. Whereas the Phalanx is... The Phalanx? takes those injuries and you have to rebuy, and it's only 15 credits more than the rat. So I just think they've found themselves without a place now that I believe, now that the Beastmaster is there, other than the fact that bows are really cool. We all want to play with bows all the time in our sci-fi settings, and this is the way to do it. Escher Gang Sister. You've got a fairly average stat line except for the initiative. You've got movement 5, weapon skill, ballistic skill 4, strength toughness 3, 1 wound, 3 initiative, which is really good, 1 attack, and 7s for all the mental skills. And that's actually a boost from where they used to be before this book. Obviously promotion specialist, tools of the trade specialist only, gang fighter, ganger. You've got agility primary, spring up is in there, combat primary, a fairly good one, but not how I'd be outfitting my gangers, to be honest. Cunning secondary, ferocity secondary. And ferocity, as I said, is a good tree to be rolling on if you become a specialist. How would I set these up, I suppose, rather than why would I make them a ranged fighter? Now, auto gun 15, always swerve. Lasgun 5 credits. The cheapest, probably best ganger in the game, I think, for the cost. 55 credits. Pins people out of the game. Reliable. Can aim and fire to get a +2 to hit at 18-inch range. Really, really good, even if you're not taking people out. What you do with these is pin people out of the game so that you can maneuver everyone else into position for the killing blow. Shotgun with acid ammo, I really like. I'll be recommending this in one of the lists. This is where I would put this because it's not using that special weapon slot that you really want on a champion. By which I mean the champion wants to take a special weapon rather than a basic weapon in the form of a shotgun. But yeah, I really recommend the shotgun there if you've got the credits, though the lasgun is just such a good option. Pistols, good as backups. Stub gun, because a las pistol is 10 credits, I think is solid. Hand flamers start mitigating your average ballistic skill here. On your specialists, you've got all the champion things. Now you've got a Nightshade Chem Thrower here. And so in the Ash Wastes, you definitely need melter guns about in the Escher list because that's what's going to be cracking vehicles for you. Everywhere else, I think this is where you put your Chem Thrower because it completely mitigates their bad or average ballistic skill. And do I think you start with that? I don't think it's the best. I think you start everyone with a lasgun if you're being like optimal. Because you can just pin people out of the game. You designate a specialist who takes a lasgun. And when you start getting more credits to make that Nightshade Thrower more and more scary, you start putting in that Chem Thrower. I think the needle rifle's good as well. As I've said before, grenade launcher is always good. As I've said before, plasma gun is always good. But needle rifle becomes scarier in the Escher list because you have access here to the Chemist. I've forgotten the name for the first time in this video. I'm surprised that I've remembered this far, the exact names of things. So combat weapons, until you get... So only on your specialists are you going to get Spring Up. Until you get Spring Up, I don't think you can spec anyone for combat. So it's really like if someone charges you and then I don't like the odds of survival. So until that point, I wouldn't massively be recommending combat weapons because for every stiletto sword, or for every 2 stiletto swords you put here, and if you get 2 combat weapons like a stiletto sword and a stub gun with dum-dums, well, I can almost get another ganger with lasgun, so I'll just do that. And I think it's more worthwhile doing that than it is anything else with these gangers. Or a shotgun with acid ammo. So Escher Little Sisters, which are the Juve type, for 20 credits, and that's really, really cheap. And Little Sisters are really good, I think. Now you get movement 5, weapon skill 4, ballistic skill 5, it's a Juve. Strength 3, so better than the Wyld Runner, which sort of outplaces the Wyld Runner because it's also 20 credits cheaper, 25 credits cheaper for getting a Juve than it is a Wyld Runner. Wounds 1, initiative 3 as is standard across Eschers, 1 attack, and 8s across the mental skills. So standard for a Juve and no real downsides like 9 pluses for any of those. So actually quite solid for Juve level and definitely really good for 20 credits. Agility is primary, so you can get that all-important spring up, all annoying spring up even. Throwing knives is basic weapons. At some point I'm going to have to recommend it. So I'm going to say put your throwing knives here, which is short range strength times 2, so it's 6-inch short range. Strength times 4 long range, -1 at long range. It's got Toxin, Silent and Scarce at -1 AP. So they're just hard to recommend because of the range over 6 giving you -1 to hit. For 5 credits, they're in fact good to put anywhere. It's just hard to recommend them anywhere because they take up a weapon slot over a las gun, which is going to be reaching out and pinning people from long range. And at short range, you really need to do that damage. Throwing knives, yeah, put them here. I don't think they're brilliant, but also they're not terrible because they just contain Toxin. So what would I be putting on Juves? To start with, stub guns, stiletto knives. Or even dual stub gun to keep them at 30 credits base for the weapons. This is where I would put photon flashes for 15 credits. I definitely also take some with smoke grenades because I think any gang that can get large access to smoke grenades, you are benefited by taking smoke grenades. Choke gas grenades are just too expensive. If you want choke gas grenades, put them on your grenade launchers, I would say. For 45 credits, they're more than double the cost of this fighter. Any fighter that's got anything else, I would recommend, if you want to take something out at range, you just want a better gun that won't immediately go out of ammo. Because gas is, although it ignores armor, so pretty much so does a plasma. Armor, 10 credits, it's half the cost of the fighter. Take another fighter for every 2 flak armors. Chemsynth, I do start to think this is more, it's useful across anyone with a toxin weapon. Because you can take spring ups on these, it starts to become a good fighter. Would I take Chemsynth straight away? No, I'd save it until you've got more credits later in the campaign and use them as disposable or shields. I say my recommendation is to use Juves as disposable. Do I use Juves as disposable? No, because I don't like playing them like that from a headcanon perspective. But from a power perspective, keep them disposable, keep them cheap, throw grenades to mitigate, because the scatter mitigates your bad ballistic skill kind of. Yeah, keep them cheap, keep them around, stomp on some heads and get them leveling up. So next, I'm going to go on to the Phyrr Cats, which is the second special exotic beast. So for 120 credits, you get movement 7, weapon skill 3, strength toughness 3, 1 wound, initiative 2, 2 attacks, leadership 7, cool 8, which is a bit of a shame because it's less cool than the Phalanx Cat. Initiative, willpower 7, intelligence 8. Now it's independent, so it can remain 9 inches rather than 3 from the owner, which is really useful. It makes it less necessary to consider the order. So I'm always finding myself considering the order of which I activate my arms master and my dog. And it means that the arms master has to activate first, otherwise the dog becomes broken at the end of its move and moves back to the arms master a lot of the time. With these, you can activate with your Phyrr Cat and then go in with your champion, which is really useful. Lands on the feet, reduce strength of the impact by 2 if you fall. Just a nice, useful special rule. The Phyrr Cat is armed with talons. He's got agility primary for that all-important spring up. I'm getting sick of saying it, but it's just so useful. Talons for the Phyrr Cat contain pulverize, so it makes flesh wounds into serious injuries on the serious injury dice roll. Do I think it's brilliant? No, it does do 2 damage though. You are lacking potential toxin here that the Phalanx gets. So I don't think it's the greatest exotic beast. Would I take one when I get more credits later in the campaign? Yes. Not to start. It doesn't protect your fighter like a dog does, and dogs are really overpriced. But I think this is on the lower end of pets. So on to your Clan Chemist. For 75 points, available only to Escher, and both Escher special hangers-on are available only to Escher gangs. I'm not going to go over the stats. She has got a needle pistol, but BS5, you're not wanting to get this Clan Chemist into combat. The Chemist does have the Fixer skill, so starts paying for herself. She is on the pricey side, but is worth the investment because of that Fixer. And not just that, I suppose. I wasn't just going to leave it there, don't worry. So, a gang with a Clan Chemist reduces the cost of Clan Alchemy Elixirs by D6 times 10 to a minimum of 10 roll each time an elixir is purchased. If you're buying just like one dose chems or one type of chem, which I would do a lot, I'd recommend that a lot of the time rather than mixing, you reduce the cost to 10 credits. And I know if you start mixing, you can reduce the entire elixir down to 10, but I find myself wanting to buy elixirs in single doses, and I think you actually need a Clan Chemist before you start buying elixirs, because she very, very quickly pays for herself with that. Another way which she starts to pay for herself is last rites. If you have a gang matriarch or gang queen that gets killed, or you let get killed if you don't take to the dock, then the player may roll a d6. If it's equal to or lower than the number of advances the fighter has, you may add a Death Maiden to your gang for free. And it's just a new Death Maiden with no additional benefits other than the fact that it's just saved you 100 and something credits and becomes a very good fighter. In fact, becomes, I think, a more expensive than the Matriarch, and only 10 credits less expensive than the leader. And it's just an excellent thing. Obviously, you've got to skill up your champions to be able to do that, but it's just an excellent, excellent thing to do, and definitely worth that 75 credits with the Fixer, last rites, and reducing the elixirs. So on to a Shivver for 100 credit, and this is much worse. She has the ability to allow a single fighter to visit the Shivver, so you roll 2d6 on the table, and it's basically a witch doctor. So of the results, you get Doom, immediately go into recovery. That's on a 2 on 2d6, so not very likely. 3 to 4, fates are unclear. Choose leadership, willpower, or intelligence, so not the key stats, including cool. May reroll failed checks, and that's a bad result. Favourable portents, may visit Shivver, may reroll any hit rolls of a natural 1 making ranged attacks, and ignore stray shots. So, beginning to get a lot better, because that is good. A great victory, if you win the next battle, that fighter earns an extra d6 XP. It's very good. I would much prefer things that help you win the next battle than if you win the next battle. A mysterious stranger can hire a bounty hunter for free. Now that's really good, because it's essentially saving you a ton of credits. But it's getting rarer because it's away from the midpoint. Anything around a 7 is most likely because of how many combinations of dice there are that come to a 7. So 10, 11 is getting more unlikely. 12, Fortune and Glory, may double the amount of experience they earn in the next battle, and may double the amount of credits and reputation the gang earns from the next battle. So in my campaign, this is where we'd introduce something to gain double credits or gain extra credits in the end of cycle. It's very unlikely, so that might even be double credits, but doubling the credits from the next battle if you're playing a standard campaign is really good. However, 100 credits, I've already recommended the Clan Alchemist. I wouldn't recommend it over the Alchemist, and it's only for that one fighter. When you have the credits, it's a nice choice for Escher to have. And we'll go on to the House Escher Elixirs. So the House Escher Elixirs are sort of a mixed bag. They can get very expensive because of only being one dose. I wouldn't recommend them to start with. There's 1 or 2 that I'd recommend having in your back pocket. If you're going to play really aggressively, I definitely recommend Night, maybe even from the start with your Death Maiden, just so that she's never rolling serious injuries. But let's go through them all. So you've got Bad Blood, which is 10 credits. Any fighter in base-to-base contact must make an initiative check if they do 1 or more wounds to this fighter. If failed, they've taken a hit from a weapon with a toxin trait. So that's not per wound, it's 1 or more wounds. You do that once. And I think that's very good. It was actually used hilariously in our what will be coming for you guys, Ghastly Prospects campaign in the fighting pits. It is absolutely hilarious. Would I recommend it? 10 credits for a single use of that. I wouldn't. I find it very hard when it's a single. I find it very hard to recommend because it's only a single time. Especially because your fighter's going out anyway and it's only a chance of doing this. But I love the Bad Blood, so I still recommend it. Oh, I'm going to be so confused with these because so many of them are really cool. Blood Rush for 15 credits may remove a single flesh wound or immediately recover from being seriously injured. And you've got to do administer dose simple action for these. It allows you to stand back up. If you manage to save your fighter from... I would recommend this on a few key members of your gang. If you can manage to save them from whatever peril they are already in, this gets them straight back into the fight and causing damage again, and I really like it. Or you can start ignoring flesh wounds if you've already taken them, there's a lull in the combat, or you can create a lull in the combat. Brainlock, you count as a psyker for disrupting enemy psychic powers. This is going to be excellent in our Ghastly Prospects campaign, where there's going to be a lot of psychic powers flying about. If you're playing in a campaign with Outlanders, whatever they're called, Outlanders, this is going to be good to have in your back pocket. You just need to take it once on 1 or 2 fighters and just have it around for when someone's got a psyker. But as I said, I like taking these single doses, is how I would recommend them to be taken, just to have with you to use when necessary. Dreamland, ignore the effects of Insane. Again, this is 10 credits. Good to have in your back pocket on fighters, which it might become useful. I'm struggling to recommend any of these low on. Blood Rush was really good. Hyper, increase movement by 2 when you make a charge and when you make a charge action, add D6 rather than D3. Now this is really good. Increased hyperactivity makes them twitchy and reduce all effects to hit by 1. And this is 20 credits. I would recommend this. When you're rolling enough dice, especially when you've got 3 attacks with your Death Maiden, you're adding 2 to the movement, so you're now movement 8, and you're adding D6. For 20 credits, that's making them really, really good. There's even an Escher card that lets you do 2 charge actions in a turn. And that means you can motor across the board and just batter people with your toxin weapons. So I would recommend this as soon as you get that experimental Clan Alchemist. Ice Cold, you add 2 to your cool checks. Really good on your leader, I would say, or maybe a leader and champion who's going to be creating them bubbles of cool. I think it's too expensive to put on each ganger, but when you have your, as I say, leader or champion that gets bubbles of cool, it's good to have. You jam it in when you fail your bottle check, and your gang just keeps fighting. Jolt, until the end of the round, counts serious injury as a flesh wound. This is terrible. You can administer it to someone else, but unless it's administered by a Juve to you, which then makes it very costly. I suppose you could play with a Juve that's running about that's just jamming elixirs into people. And that might be the use for this. But it makes it much more situational. Administering it to yourself means that your charge double action can't be done anymore. So I don't think this is worth it at all. It's only worth it when you get charged, survive that combat, it becomes your round, you jam yourself if you don't want to run away, and then hit them, and don't care about the reaction attacks. But that's meaning that you're taking they've already fluffed a round of attacks. If they roll multiple critical injuries or serious injuries, you might just go out due to the flesh wounds. So I don't really like this one. Night Night, really good. It keeps your matriarchs, leaders Death Maidens around when they get higher up in amount of XP and you don't want them to be dying. So you can still be captured, but being out cold is really good, especially when you've got credits flying about. For only 25 credits, I'd start this on your Death Maiden every time. I'd start this one. Anyone that wants to get into combat every game. And I'd probably have one floating about on my Matriach just in case it was getting hairy. Puke doubles toughness against Toxin and Gas. Potentially good, but largely against other Escher Gangs, if there is one in your campaign, and Delac potentially. So situationally useful. As I said, I like these in single doses, so all these situational ones I might start taking later in a campaign as I get more credits built up. As I get like a stable sort of 8, 10 in the gang with spare gang members, when they're equipped how I want, at least to a basic level, these start coming in, these situationally useful chems. And I do think it's situationally useful if you've got other Eschers or Delac. Wide Eye, ignore the effect of pitch black rules. And incidentally, I think that actually ignores the effect of Ashway's Nomad's Ash Mantles. So again, really situationally useful. It's 10 credits. If you're playing Ashway's Nomads, really good. If you're ambushing someone, really good. If you're being ambushed, I suppose really good. If they're sentries, they always count enemy fighters out in the open. Really good. Have them on, I'd say this you want on your gangers with lasguns, because those are the ones that you want standing around being sentries, and it means that you'll alert with the alarm much earlier. So I do think it's quite good for 10 credits later in the campaign. Would I start with it ever? No. I'd start with Night Knight on potentially my Death Maiden and just mook fools and not care if I go out of action. So onto the gaseous ammo. And this is on your Nightshade Shade Chem Thrower, your grenade launchers, mainly them two. And this is where the Nightshade Chem Thrower starts to become really scary. But again, it's only one battle. So you need to have that Alchemist to make them cheaper. This is where it would combine effects, because they all apply all battles, so you combine it into one chem, make it all cheaper to 10 credits. So acidic, an enemy fighter hit by, or any fighter hit by a gas trait with gaseous ammo, does not benefit from armor or war gear that normally increase their toughness against gas. Out of action results on injury dice by hits with a weapon count as serious injuries instead. So I don't even see that as a downside, that last bit. 20 credits, I throw it into the mix of your concoction for your gaseous ammo. I actually really like serious injury, sometimes, situationally I suppose, because then I can choose who's stomping on people's heads to get the experience. Why do I want to remove that out of action? I don't always, but if someone's taking respirators, this is a really good one to take, especially a Goliath with a respirator, so you would only be wounding them on a 6, and this ignores that. Bane for 15 creds. Fighter hit by a weapon with gas trait counts as toughness 3, regardless of their actual toughness. So this is really good when combined with acidic, because it means that high toughness and respirated opponents still only toughness 3. I do really like this. It's good against the higher toughness people. It makes it only good against like Goliaths and stuff. It's worth having in your stash, but it's situationally useful, more so, I suppose, than acidic, because any gang can take respirators. And if they know you're taking gaseous ammo, they're going to be taking respirators, I think. Blackout. If a fighter suffers a serious injury from a weapon with the gaseous trait, they're taken out of action just as if they've rolled out of action. When taken out of action with a weapon with the gas trait, do not roll, they just go out cold. This basically makes your gas weapons, such as gas grenade launchers, a web gun. And you can also make them always toughness 3, and you can also apply a chem synth to make them basically a 2-up out of action, which is ridiculously good, though it is 30 credits. So you're going to have to roll higher on your concoctions with your elixir to take it down to 10 credits, which is surely what we're aiming for. But yeah, really like this one when you have the credits. Definitely worth it. Blinding. A fighter that suffers a flesh wound from a weapon with the gas trait with gaseous ammo becomes subject to blind. 10 credits. I wouldn't actually take this. I just prefer taking people out of action, other than the photon flash, which is so good when it's the big template and it can be cheap on Juves. This, when it's you're buying it every game, well, I'm just going to try and take you out of action much more easily with something like Blackout or Bane. So I wouldn't recommend it pretty much in any situation personally. Expansive can only be applied with gas and Blast X, so not on your Chem Thrower. Place one more blast marker than normal. It's placed so it's touching at least one other blast marker generated by this weapon. From my reading of it, you can stack them to get multiple hits on opponents. And it also basically gives you torrent from what... It can correct your stray shots, go around corners. I really like this. For 20 credits, I really think it's worth it. It's just great. And this is one thing about Eschers. People think that they're, or say that a harder gang because you need to get those initial credits. I think they're massively multiplied by those initial credits. Whereas Goliath can start with really broken combinations initially, these get really, really good in the mid-late game or even after a few games because you get so reliable at taking out opponents. Hallucinogen become insane if they fail a willpower check in addition to their toughness. So it still does the damage. They might become insane. Then it's a further check to see if they shoot their own fighter or they control them. It's not my favourite one. For the 15 credits, it's maybe worth it when stacked with something else, so it total goes down to 10. Insane is largely scary when it's like a psychic power or it's an environmental effect. I'm not a massive fan of insane causing weapons because I'd prefer to just take them out. Leaden, so 30 credits. So when resolving an attack using the gas trait, place a 3-inch blast marker so its central hole is within the area of the flame template or blast marker placed making the effect. Any fighters moving through the blast marker count as being hit with that weapon. It remains in play until the end of the current round. So good if you've got, I think, good when you're getting closer to your opponent with a Chem Thrower. Because it magnifies the effect of that Chem Thrower. Obviously, it's happening every time you use it. But I think this is best used on a grenade launcher with gas ammo. Because you can start doing that from turn 1 and really manipulate your opponent's movement by placing gas down that is going to be causing hits on them if they go down certain corridors of movement, not just ZM. Lifting with no G. So lifting is 25 credits, can only be applied to weapons with gas and template. May be placed anywhere up to 6 inches from the fighter making the attack. When placing the template, it must be positioned so the narrow end paints directly towards the fighter making the attack. So essentially gives you what's it called? Torrent, I've already mentioned it before. Essentially gives you torrent, except you can't position it in any direction. I think this is really, really useful because it magnifies, it nearly doubles the range of your Nightshade Chem Thrower. So I think it's definitely useful taking. It just magnifies the effects of that Chem Thrower. I definitely recommend taking it as one of your options in the 3. Pathogenic. If a fighter is hit with a weapon with the gas trait with gaseous ammo, place a marker next to them at the start of the next activation. 3+, remove this marker and a 1 or 2 suffers another gas hit. 15 credits. Now, would I take that or Leaden? I'd take Leaden because you're affecting multiple people or multiple people's movement with that. I'm basically wanting to take people out if I hit them with a weapon. And I don't think it goes off often enough. It only goes off a third of the time. So I just don't, whereas everything else goes off all the time. Like the effect comes into play all the time. So I just don't think it's that great. Now, the last one, Pyrophoric, they count as being hit with the Blaze trait. Now, this I think is an excellent one. 20 credits, and it's immediate to stop them doing damage to you. And when I say I want to stop people, when I want to take them out straight away, I think denying someone the ability to use their fighter, from a power perspective, it's sort of stun locking them, which can be a negative gameplay experience. So long as you don't do it too much, it's not too bad. But denying their ability to do an action is just as good in a lot of cases as taking them out. So what would I recommend? On a chem thrower, lifting, pyrophoric, and blackout, because it gives the most chances to stop them hurting you, it increases the range, and it takes them out. What would I recommend on a grenade launcher? Well, I'd recommend expansive for putting down multiple blast markers and basically chaining blast markers with the leaden, which makes them stick around, or at least one of those blast markers stick around, and blackout, because blackout helps you take people out, because it changes those serious injuries to out of actions. As I said, I do like this. I like pretty much all of these, except for that pathogenic. I did say I liked the acidic for changing out of actions to serious injured. It's more situational, which is why I would recommend blackout. But I do like all of these in the concoctions. This is where I take concoctions. So toxic ammo. Apply to your toxin weapons. Bleeding. If a fighter is injured by a weapon with toxin traits with this ammo applied and is not taken out of action, place a marker on their fighter card. At the beginning of the end phase, the marker is replaced by a flesh wound. So it's like you're getting flesh wounds in lieu, extra flesh wounds. And I think it's good for 10 credits. Although it doesn't kick until at the end of the turn, if you can nail someone near the end of the turn, it's just basically a damage immediately anyway, especially if they've already activated. Concentrated, and especially it's good in sneak attack scenarios where you've got until the next round to take them out. Concentrated, the first time a weapon with a toxin trait with this toxic ammo hits enemy fighters, add 2 to the dice roll to see if it overcomes the fighter's toughness. Note that the toxic ammo only affects this weapon's first successful hit. So that's 15 credits. Do I think it's worth it? Absolutely. I always try and spec, as I always say, to take people out as fast as possible. If I'm being wacky about things. When you're adding effects to things, you've got to obviously see what your opponents are doing, how strong you're doing. But if we're talking power levels, take them out straight away, take concentrated. Because it's every fighter, if you shoot a second, you just shoot something one different the next round. Debilitating. If a fighter is injured with this ammo and not taken out of action, place a marker. For each marker, subtract 1 from any characteristic checks that they are required to take. At the end of the battle, if the fighter goes out of action, remove these markers. Obviously, it's got no lasting effects beyond the battle. Sort of weird that they put that in, because do the flesh wound markers from bleeding disappear? Of course they do. 10 credits, would I take it? No, pretty much never, because those characteristic checks don't help me kill people. Why would I not just take something that helps me kill people, like concentrated, for only 5 credits more? Decaying. If a fighter is injured by a weapon with the toxin trait with this toxic ammo and he's not taken out of action, for each place a marker. For each marker on the card must subtract 1 from the save rolls they're required to make. So it helps you take them out a second time if you end up firing another ganger at them. Do I like it more than concentrated? No. Is it worth having? Yes, especially because it's only 5 credits. So you're more likely to get down to that magic 10 with your alchemist. It's also cheap if you've not got an alchemist. Is it worth it? Yes, because it's 5 credits. 5 credit things are pretty much always worth it, I would say. Exploding. So that's 20 credits. If a fighter is taken out of action by a hit with the toxin trait with this toxic ammo applied, basically they become a blast marker 3 inches from the hole centered on their base. So that's centered anywhere on the base. So it's a 1.5 inch radius from that blast marker, All fighters touched suffer an immediate hit as if from a weapon with the gas trait. Excellent for crowd control, especially in Zone Metallis. This is like the Zone Metallis ammo. Maddening. If a fighter is injured for the remainder of the battle or their attacks gain reckless. So if they're injured, do I like it? 5 credits. As I've said, 5. And it's not just because I'm committing, it's 5 credits. Pretty much always worth taking. If someone's in their vision arc, I think it is for reckless. Because I try to avoid it as a player, I try to avoid taking reckless weapons. So I don't, no, like, is it worth it? Yes, it's always worth it giving them a negative special rule for 5 credits. Maiming. If a fighter is taken out of action by a weapon with the toxin ammo, roll twice on lasting injuries. Excellent if you want to be despised in your gaming group. To me, try and win the game. Try not to do ongoing damage to people's gangs. If you are playing in a group that is like that, that's taking, Helmar's Justice on their enforcers, take this, but it's just a bit infuriating. Panicking. If a fighter is injured, they immediately become broken as if they fail a nerve check. I actually like this one. Again, it's something that if you don't take them out, it prevents their action till the end of the turn, because it's just immediately applied if they're injured and not taken out. Is it worth it for 10? Yes, it prevents damage coming back to you. Paralyzing. If injured with a toxin trait weapon, they must immediately take a strength check or become paralyzed, counting as being webbed. Is this good? Yes. Webbed conditions are horrendous. To play against, that is, not for the Escher player here. It gives you that extra chance of just making them do no damage back to you and you can just stomp them. Yeah, it's hard to not recommend. I'm struggling with, do I recommend something that's webbed when I so venomously despise webbed stuff? Yes, I do, because they've got to be injured. You're likely to take them seriously injured anyway. It just is that the infuriating thing about webbed is ignoring the armor, because that's the downside of a template, is the pluses to armor for going through terrain. Here, you're not doing that. It's less infuriating. It's good. Silencing. If injured, for the remainder of the round, they cannot issue or be part of Groot activations. It's fairly good. It's 5 credits. It's an additional effect. Do I like it? And paralyzing is 5 creds, by the way, which is really good, because it's an additional chance of webbing it for that. Do I like it? Not as much as the other 5 credit things. So what would I recommend for a toxin weapon here? Paralyzing, definitely in combat. Everything, I think, is best with concentrated. That's the first place I'd go. I really like panicking for 10 credits. Or you only have to roll a 2 to make a concentrated panicking weapon 10 credits for that toxin. I also like exploding for 20. So that would make the concentrated panicking exploding. That would make it 45 credits. So you're getting slightly up there in chance of not getting down to 10 credits for the ammo. I just like that combination. The exploding is really good for crowd control. I'd possibly save that for Zone Metalis, but I just think it's possibly one of the best one. Bleeding as well if you're not in Zone Metalis. So bleeding, concentrated, panicking at 35 credits. Yeah, those are my combinations. As I say, stims used singly in my mind. Gaseous ammo, we want blackout, expansive, and pyrophoric. Or blackout, expansive, leaden, or blackout, expansive, pyrophoric. I prefer leaden for sticking around. And toxic ammo, concentrated. Oh, there's just so many options. It's a good thing there's so many options that are really good, because I actually had a list that I was going to read from and I've just done it as I've gone along. Yeah, those are the ones that I'd recommend. Panicking, concentrated, bleeding, that is. Or paralyzing in combat. Oh, there's exploding, concentrated, exploding, panicking. You choose. That's the benefit of a tabletop game rather than a computer game, is you just get to choose. So finally, I don't know why I'm flicking through the book. I was looking for my example list. What do I recommend as an example list? And first, I'm going to go through what I'm going to be using or planning on using at this point in our next campaign. So that's a Gang Queen with Needle Pistol Shockwick, Chem Synth with Spring Up, a Gang Matriach with Combi Weapon, which is a Melter. Because I'm in the initial stages, these are all Spring Up. You can obviously diversify from here. So Spring Up on the Melter Gun. Death Maiden, Venom Core, Chem Synth, Spring Up. And that's even changed from a week ago when I wrote this list to a sword because I want to spec into Combat Virtuoso next. So it's a stiletto sword, Chem Synth, and I just didn't have any more credits to put even a stub gun on. Then I've got 2 Wyld Runners with poison arrows, Chem Synths, and a Phalanx Cat, just for the flavour of it. An Escher Gang sister with a shotgun with acid ammo, just for the hell of it. And then I had a little sister with a stiletto knife and stub gun. I'd potentially put the stub gun on the Death Maiden just because it gives the Death Maiden that I really need to be taking people out that extra attack, even if it's only strength 3. The reason I'm taking that gang is because I'm probably going to put all of them on a bike. It's going to be an Ash Waste campaign when everything gets a bit more into the Ash Waste, everyone gets their special options a bit more. So my second example gang is not an Ash Waste campaign gang. I've not really taken the Melter because I don't need to crack vehicles. So I've gone with, and it's more of a standard build. So let's get into it. We've got an Escher Gang Queen with a needle pistol, lasgun, stiletto sword, chemsynth. Lasgun's just on there because it's really cheap. A Death Maiden, needle pistol, venom claw, chemsynth. Though again, stiletto sword, it's a trade-off because clearly on this day, I was thinking our AP is really important because you can always spec into that retreat if you don't go the versatile. But today I'm feeling the combat virtuoso for the stiletto sword. So that's where my mind's at for why it's so changeable. Even with the gaseous ammo, it's so changeable. They're so adaptable is this gang. It's just not a beginner gang, as I say, because there's no clear route. Gang Matriach with a plasma gun, standard, really good. Gang Sister with a Nightshade Chem Thrower, because the model looks quite cool. It's in the box, it looks quite cool. I wanted to suggest one. 2 Gang Sisters with lasguns. Now, these are really good. If I wasn't taking the Nightshade Chem Thrower, which I don't think is the best option, I'd replace that 1 Gang Sister with the Nightshade Chem Thrower with 3 gangers with lasguns, and it would make this gang better to start. Then I've got 2 Little Sisters, both with stiletto knives, stub guns, grenades, which are photon flash flares. So that's very quickly, Gang Queen, needle pistol, lasgun, stiletto sword, chemsynth. Death Maiden, needle pistol, stiletto sword or venom claw and chemsynth. Matriarch with a plasma gun. 3 gangers to 5 gangers, either with chem thrower, lasgun, or 5 lasguns. And 2 Little Sisters, stub gun, stiletto knife, photon flash flares. And that is my 2 lists that I'm going to... I suppose it's 3 because I've given the options of them 5 gangers. But those are my 2 lists that I'm going to recommend. So that's the end of the rundown. And if you liked it, please click like, comment below what you think I should have added to this, what other strategies that you guys want to pass on to other Escher players. Subscribe to the channel. It helps me know in the analytics, basically, that you guys like this content, and that will mean that I produce more of this content. If you really want to support the channel that bit more, there is the Patreon link below, which basically helps to keep these videos coming. Big thanks to all the Patreons that are already there. They've got access to the Discord server, as well as been sent a dice tray that you guys can get your hands on if you become Patreons. And there is also now a affiliate link for the War Office for guys or girls in the UK, which do 30% off on all new releases, and that's actually a local store to me. I still recommend Monstrous Light, but I also recommend War Office. Yeah, the War Office link is below. And thank you for watching. Thank you for making it to the end of this video, as I'm sure a lot of people turn off from my moronically droning voice far before this point. In a bit.